Welcome back again to the Fedric's lens. Before there were instruments, before there were diagrams, before there were charts, calendars, or measured systems, there was a simpler human condition. Look up, survive, remember. That is where this story really begins. Not with astronomy as a formal discipline. Not with polished metal tools. Not with scholars explaining the heavens. It begins much earlier. It begins with human beings living in a world that was not yet buffered by clocks, whether apps, maps, or modern scheduling systems. A world where timing mattered, where seasons mattered, where movement mattered, where mistaking the rhythm of the world could cost you food, safety, or direction. And in that world, one thing stood above everything else as the great visible pattern. The sky. That is what made the heavens so important. Not first as philosophy, not first as science, but first as recurring order. The sun returned. The moon changed in sequence. Stars appeared, disappeared, and returned again. Light and darkness alternated with a discipline the human body could not ignore. This was not a minor detail of life. It was one of the first great experiences of dependable structure. That is why ancient humans did not merely admire the sky. They depended on it. And dependence changes the way human beings look. When your survival is tied to rhythm, you stop seeing the world as background. You begin looking for recurrence. You begin asking different questions. When does the light return? When does the cold break? When does the season shift? Which direction holds steady? What comes back? What can be trusted? That is the beginning of order. Not when the world is fully explained, but when something in the world returns strongly enough to be trusted. That is the real threshold. And the sky offered that threshold in a way few other things could. The ground changes. Animals move unpredictably. Weather shifts violently. Human memory can fail. But above all of that, the heavens presented something different. Not perfect certainty, but recurrence. Enough recurrence to begin building confidence. Enough confidence to begin building behavior. That is the first major insight. Human beings did not need a complete theory of the universe before the sky became useful. They only needed to notice that it repeated. That mattered because it tells us something very deep about civilization. Order begins not when everything is understood, but when repetition becomes believable. That is how trust starts. Not through total knowledge, through recurring pattern. The same sunrise, the same phases, the same return of certain visible signs. Once that happens, the world begins to feel less chaotic. Not because chaos is gone, but because something inside reality starts to look dependable. And once something looks dependable, human beings begin organizing around it. That is what the sky became. An external pattern strong enough to help stabilize human life. Think about what that means. Before writing, before precision instruments, before advanced mathematics, there was already a vast visible system overhead offering repeated signals. The sky was not just scenery. It was one of the earliest teachers of recurrence. And recurrence does something powerful to the human mind. It reduces fear. It sharpens attention. It strengthens memory. It creates expectation. It teaches that not everything is random. That lesson may be one of the oldest civilizational lessons of all. Because once people begin to feel that reality has repeating structure, they can start coordinating themselves around it. That is where the story moves from personal survival to collective order. A pattern remembered by one person is helpful. A pattern remembered by many becomes culture. Now the sky is no longer only something seen. It becomes something shared. A common reference, a common rhythm, a common frame. This is where ancient skywatching becomes larger than observation. It becomes a social memory system. A community can begin to inherit timing through repeated attention to the heavens. A season can be expected. A cycle can be anticipated. A return can be prepared for. And that changes human life profoundly. Because now behavior is not only reaction. It begins becoming coordination. This is one of the deepest transitions in the whole series. The sky becomes useful before it becomes theoretical. That line matters, because modern people often imagine that knowledge becomes important only after it becomes formal. But ancient life shows something else. A pattern can be powerful long before it is mathematically modeled. A rhythm can shape behavior long before it is fully explained. A world can begin organizing itself around recurrence before it knows why recurrence happens. That is the first real form of sky order. And once you see that, the heavens start looking different. Not just as a mystery, but as one of the earliest stable surfaces on which human beings could project memory, expectation, and timing. There is also something else happening here. The sky does not only help answer when. It begins helping answer where. This part is subtle but important. The heavens are not only a clock-like pattern. They are also an orientation pattern. Even before sophisticated tools, human beings could sense that the sky was not just changing. It was changing with structure. Movement overhead implied relation. Direction was not completely blind. The heavens helped create one of the earliest feelings that human beings were not moving inside a totally unmarked world. That is a huge shift. Because once the world starts to feel marked by recurrence, it becomes easier to imagine that it can eventually be read. That is the seed of everything that comes later. The mathematics, the instruments, the diagrams, the navigation systems. All of it depends on something earlier. The recognition that the sky behaves in patterns strong enough to matter. And that is what this first stage is really about. It is the birth of trust in recurrence. The birth of sky order. The birth of the idea that reality might not be pure chaos. If you imagine ancient life clearly enough, you can feel why this mattered so much. No modern scheduling grid. No standardized artificial time environment. No glowing device telling you what comes next. Just exposure. Exposure to weather. Exposure to darkness. Exposure to seasonal change. Exposure to uncertainty. In a world like that, the recurring sky is not just beautiful. It is a relief. It tells you that something returns. Something holds. Something can be waited for. Something can be remembered. That is why the heavens became one of humanity's earliest great systems of order. Not because ancient people were naive. Not because they projected meaning onto empty space. But because repeated celestial structure gave them one of the strongest visible experiences of dependable pattern they had. And dependable pattern is the beginning of civilization. Because civilization is not only buildings, laws, and states. It is also the growing ability to organize life around what can be trusted to return. That is exactly what the sky offered. A patterned world overhead. A repeating field of signals. A visible discipline that human beings could learn from before they could fully explain it. That is why this stage matters so much. It is the foundation underneath everything that comes later. Before you can measure the sky, you have to trust it. Before you can diagram it, you have to notice it. Before you can build tools for it, you have to believe that it contains enough order to be worth holding onto. That is the real first step. Not instrument. not geometry. Recognition. The recognition that recurrence itself can guide life. And once that happens, the next pressure begins to build. Because seeing repetition is powerful. But memory alone is limited. A season can be remembered. A return can be noticed. A cycle can be felt. But if a civilization is going to hold celestial order more precisely, something more is needed. Pattern has to become structure. Return has to become countable. Motion has to become thinkable. And that is where the next stage begins. Because once human beings realized that the heavens repeat, the next step was inevitable. They would begin searching for a language strong enough to hold that order. That is where the story goes next. You made it to the end, you're a legend. If this video made you see the world a little differently, go ahead and smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Let me know down below what should I cover next. I appreciate you all so much. Catch you in the next video. Look closer, see further, decide for yourself.